What's wrong with you? You have problem? And then he just goes, I'm a black man. I'm black. They hate us. They hate us for being Jews. Well, Iraqi Arabic, for starters, is not real Arabic. That means that the Jewish dialect is also predates the Arabic dialect. So, hello, my name's Tal. I also go by the name the Traveling Clat. I've been traveling around the world for the last 10 years as a travel YouTuber, travel blogger. It brought me to 64 countries. I also happen to be an Israeli American. So my parents are Israeli and most of my family lives in Israel. And since the advent of the October 7th war that Hamas started against Israel, I became an advocate for the state of Israel and for the Jewish people. Um, sort of put all my other work to the side and my travel stuff to the side and just focused on reaching out to predominantly Arabs and Muslims who are very negative or attack Israel in the media and on social media, and to anti-Semites and try to bridge that gap in my own way. And one of the biggest things I focus on is telling the story of the Mizrachi Jews. I also try to also include like the African Jewish diaspora in that story as much as I can, but really focus on fighting against the white colonizer narrative that's been subjected on Jewish people this year.
Hmm. Yeah, so one of the reasons that I wanted to interview you for this show is because this is a new show that I'm starting here called The Dignity of Difference, and it's based on a book that Rabbi Sachs wrote right after 9/11, but it's applicable now. And it's basically about the idea of the way that we bridge those gaps is by honoring and respecting the differences between us and finding a way to celebrate it rather than trying to downplay our differences. And I think, obviously, as you just mentioned, everything that you're doing fits into that perspective perfectly. Yeah, so I thought maybe, well, actually, I saw a podcast that you did, I don't know what it was, like 6 months ago or something, where you were talking about your family history and your grandparents and where they came from. And I thought it was really interesting because I actually share some similar background, but before I talk about myself, which is not what this is about, maybe you want to take me through a little bit about your parents and your grandparents and how you ended up where you are now.
So, like my family, we really embody that Jewish spirit of wandering. Like I was born in America, but have never lived in one place. My whole life, I've been tossed back and forth between Israel and the U.S. And then myself, I've been traveling around the world for the last 10 years. So the definition of home hasn't really existed for me personally for a long time. Um, then my parents were born here in Israel, in central Israel, in Tel Aviv. But actually, my grandparents, like all four grandparents, both parents on both parents' sides, were all four of them were born in different places in the Muslim world. So my grandpa on my dad's side, he was born in the Caucasus Mountain region. He was from a group of Jews called Nashtidan. They spoke Aramaic and they were kind of like Bedouins. They were wandering Jews that didn't really have a home. We believe that he was born somewhere in Georgia, but we don't actually know. And we think that he was either born in Azerbaijan, Georgia, or Armenia. And they used to just wander until they ran to Turkey and then were persecuted in Turkey, ran to Israel. His wife, my dad's mom, she was born in Istanbul and also left Istanbul because of Jewish persecution. And then on my mom's side is the side that I'm really, really connected to, which is the Iraqi side. Um, so my mom's dad was born in Baghdad, and generationally, they believe they had been in Baghdad for like 2,000 years.
Wow.
When I interviewed my grandfather's oldest brother like 2 years ago before he passed away, he had told me that that's the story that they believed that they were there from the first exile of the first temple when the Jews were first casted out to Babylon, and some of them stayed. And actually, they look a little bit different than some of the other Jews from the Babylonian or the Iraqi background because they're very, very light skinned. Um, his wife, my grandma, my only remaining grandparent that's alive, Miriam, she was also born in Baghdad, but her family lineage is half Kurdish, half Basrawi, which is the Jews that came from Ur Kasdim, the birthplace of Abraham. So the genealogy is really fascinating because my family is all Mesopotamian, pretty much. Everybody comes from the Fertile Crescent. Everybody is indigenous to the Levant slash Israel slash this region. But again, on a consistent basis, I get told to go back to Poland, go back to Auschwitz,
Mm.
go back to where I came from. I'm always like, I'm here. I'm back to where I came from.
So you're really the perfect example of, um, the Jewish connection to the land.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's really interesting. So does that mean that your entire family, you're like fully Sephardi,
Mizrachi, but yeah.
Mizrachi Sephardi? Is there
Like my
what's the difference? Is there a difference between the two?
S- Sephardi is more like the Jews that came from the Spanish diaspora
Yeah,
from
in
Iberia,
Europe.
like
Yeah.
during the Inquisition. So actually, my grandma from Turkey, they spoke Ladino, which is the
Yes.
Hebrew, the Hebrew Spanish dialect, and that's because we think we're not sure that she was potentially from the Spanish Inquisition. Her family had been kicked out to Turkey, and that's
Yeah.
where they had refuge until Turkey kicked them out.
Yeah.
So there's a chance that like 1/4 of my family is like Spanish Jewry, but
Mm.
we don't really know, you know. Like, but my grandpa, my grandma, and my father both my father still speaks Ladino till today.
Really?
Yeah,
That's cool. Yeah, because
yeah.
my grandmother was born in Turkey, and she spoke Ladino with her family, and they were originally from Spain, and then a lot of the family ended up in Greece after the Inquisition, but for some reason, her parents and her sisters ended up in Turkey, and then they came to Israel. They moved to Israel when she was small, and she grew up there before they came to Australia. So yeah, so my grandmother, she spoke Ladino with her sisters who all stayed in Israel. So when they wrote letters to each other, they'd all be in Ladino. And I've got like a whole box of them. And I have this Haggadah in Ladino that was hers from when she
Wow.
grew up, which is really cool. I know a little bit of Spanish, a little bit of Hebrew, not enough to be able to read it, but maybe one day. But I was curious. You were talking about that there's like an Iraqi Jewish dialect that people don't
Yes.
really know about
Hmm.
that your grandmother speaks or something, or you were learning. Can you tell me a bit about that?
So I don't know how to speak it myself, but my entire family on the Iraqi side speaks it. My mom grew up speaking it. She still knows how to speak it today. My grandma, when I try to speak to my grandma in Arabic, which I'm learning now, she just reverts to speaking to me in that dialect, and I have no idea what she's saying. But it's a mixed dialect of, well, first of all, Iraqi Arabic, for starters, is not real Arabic. It's mixed
Okay.
in with a lot of Sumerian and Akkadian words that existed there before the Arabs colonized the land. And so that means that the Jewish dialect is also predates the Arabic dialect. So it's actually like it's three languages kind of shoved into one. So there's Hebrew words, and then there's Aramaic words, and there's also Sumerian words and Akkadian words tossed into one familial group of one language called the Iraqi Jewish dialect.
Hmm.
Um, my grandpa, somewhere in our house in the U.S., we have a siddur that's in that language. It's really fascinating. Again, I wouldn't be able to quote to you specific words because I don't know, but yeah, it's its own language that's similar to what like Ladino is or what Yiddish is. And you actually see this in the Mizrachi Jewish diaspora in a lot of places where Jews form their own dialects with the local language.
So, how many people still speak that dialect today?
Couple thousand, I would say, whatever diaspora is left in Israel, but it's definitely dying out. Like there's a
Mm.
great teacher online. His name is Dan Shina, and he is like he specifies in teaching Iraqi Jewish dialect.
Mm.
I connected with him about a year ago. He's an amazing guy. He's based here in Israel. His family came here in the 70s, so they were one of the latest to come to Israel from Iraq. They refused to leave. They wanted to stay, wanted to stay, wanted to stay until it got too dangerous, and then they ended up coming. Um, and yeah, he actually focuses on revitalizing and teaching that. There's also like a thriving Iraqi diaspora in Israel. So the city of Ol Yehuda is pretty much known as the Iraqi Jewish city in Israel, and There's like Iraqi restaurants. There's the Babylonian Jewish Museum there. So the community is thriving, and a lot of the descendants, I think we take a lot of pride in it. Like I grew up very much connected to the Iraqi side, eating kuba selik and kuba khamusta and all the different, Iraqi Jewish cuisines. And that side of my family, I'm way more connected to, at least culturally. And so I think a lot of us Iraqi Jews, we have a lot of pride in it because one, the history is so fascinating. It's very, 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 very ancient. Like the history is mind blowing. And we also, we have a reputation of being like the funny Mizrachi Jews. We have the reputation of having really, really good food. We usually get along with everybody, considering all the other Mizrachi Jewish diasporas. Not to say anything bad about other Mizrachi Jews, just um, I think there's a lot of points to find pride in. And so you see that today, maybe a lot of the descendants don't speak Iraqi Jewish dialect, 'cause most of them don't, especially my generation don't. Um, that's been taken over with Hebrew.
Mm.
Uh, we still find we will still call ourselves Iraqi, like we take a lot of pride in that.
Yeah, I think it's at least in my experience in Australia, because the majority of the community here is Ashkenazi and mostly descendants of Holocaust survivors. You don't really hear a lot about the Mizrachi or Middle Eastern Jews, and I don't know how many there are here, even aside from people that travel and Israelis that come here and whatnot. But yeah, it's really interesting, and I think we should all be learning more about the diversity within the Jewish world. Um, so you grew up, did you say you were born in America, but you grew up in Israel?
Yeah, I was born in America. I was raised in a very weird whirlwind of like back and forth, back and forth. My parents couldn't really decide where they wanted us to be. We also made Aliyah at one point when I was a kid, and then came back to America. But also, like I try to explain to people, like growing up in South Florida,
Hmm.
it's not like in that Jewish community, it's more of an Israeli community. It's not like
Okay.
growing up in New England or in California. Um, Actually, Ashkenazi Jews are a minority there. So we grew up in what
All
I would
right.
call like a chamula of Israeli Jews. A lot of Mizrachi Jews. All the stores are predominantly like catering towards the Mizrachi heritage. Like I didn't grow up like a normal kid eating McDonald's and Burger King. I grew up eating bisli and bamba and
Hmm.
speaking Hebrew as my first language in Florida. So we very much grew up like as a very strong, tight-knit Israeli community in South Florida. And I would say like a lot of the biggest Israel advocates today, at least for my generation, a lot of them came from South Florida because we grew up with this duality of not just being American. We're very, very much Israeli. A lot of us grew up speaking fluent Hebrew, and we grew up practicing Israeli culture and going to Israel very frequently. Um, yeah, so it's a very, very different, I would say, reality than a lot of people have growing up as a Jew in New York, New Jersey, Boston, DC, or LA.
Did you find there was much of a sort of crossover between that community and like the Ashkenazi community in Florida or anywhere that you traveled in the US? Or was it like you kind of a bit more insular, keep to yourselves?
It's funny because like I think Mizrahi Jews have a tendency to just kind of like be a little bit more free flowing. Like they just kind of like whoever's there, as long as you come with a good vibe, like we're fine. It doesn't really
Okay.
matter what your religious background is, whatever.
Hmm.
Because like I would say that most of the people I grew up with in South Florida are Mizrahi Jews that didn't have a specific religious affiliation. Like we would go to synagogue on the holidays, some would keep kosher, some wouldn't. When in the Ashkenazi circles in South Florida, a lot of times it was way more like either you're in an Orthodox community or in a gated community. It's like you're like you're together, you're more tight knit. When in the Mizrahi Jewish culture in South Florida, it's kind of like whoever is. I recently had this thought experiment. I was trying to figure out like, did I actually grow up with any Ashkenazi Jews? Because when I think of like my friends growing up, I think all of them were Mizrahi, minus maybe one or two. It was only once I got to high school and we started mixing in with like different Jewish kids from different backgrounds that I started finding more Ashkenazi Jews. And also South Florida, there's a lot of Jewish diaspora from South America, so Latino Jews,
Mm.
who also are a mix, but actually tend to be a little bit more Ashkenazi that came to South America. But
Interesting.
they also throw you for a whirlwind because they're not the typical Ashkenazi Jews because they
Mm.
all speak Spanish and are Latino in culture. So it's like
Mm.
South Florida is a very, very, very interesting place for Jewish diaspora, like extremely interesting.
Yeah, because I was speaking to someone else recently who comes from a very Orthodox Ashkenazi community in Canada, but it's sort of similar. Um, and he was saying that in the Orthodox communities and versus Sephardi versus Ashkenazi, generally there's a bit of a like they look down on members of the community that might like intermarry or even interdate, and I found that a bit. I personally I find it a bit worrying because even here in Australia, even though majority of people are Ashkenazi, it's like we don't like. I went to school and everyone was Ashkenazi. Like there's like zero diversity. Even though there are Israelis here and there's a Sephardi shul just down the road and there's people here, but for some reason we don't mix in the same circles. And I don't know, I think it's a problem. And I think there needs to be a bit more of that, we need that free flowing attitude over here a little bit.
That's what Israel's for.
Yeah, that's right. But, we can't all move to Israel. So, but what he was saying is that there's a bit of a judgment that happens between groups of Jews, and I'm thinking to myself like it's enough that people might judge someone that's not Jewish as being different, like if you marry out or that whole conversation. But between two Jews, just for the fact that you happen to be exiled to a different part of the world at one point in time, like that. So I don't know. Do you find that, well, I mean, you didn't grow up in a Ashkenazi community, but I'm sure you've been exposed to different groups, and I know in Israel there's lots of different groups, and that exists. Do you find that that's a problem that people deal with, or everyone's just kind of chill over there, a bit more chill
Yeah,
than the
I
rest of
may
us?
not have I may not have grown up around a lot of Ashkenazi Jews, but I have like tons of lived experience with them. And I would say that like, for example, I did a year where I lived in Brooklyn and I didn't know anything
Right.
about Brooklyn when I moved there, but I moved to
Mm.
Williamsburg and I lived not in the hipster part of Williamsburg. I moved to the Hasidic
Yeah.
Satmar part of Brooklyn.
Right.
Now, me being ignorant, not knowing anything about Satmar at the time, I was like, Jews? I love it. I'm gonna be surrounded by Jews. Like this is gonna be amazing. I moved into my apartment, like was super excited to live amongst my people. And until that year, I had never felt more isolated from Judaism in my
Mm.
life until I lived amongst these religious Jews because they were not nice to me. They would not talk to me. I would say Shabbat Shalom to people and they would ignore me.
You have to
When
say
I'd
good
walk into
Shabbos.
like,
That's why.
well, like I also trying to colonize a little bit, like bring
Yeah.
back like I'd go to like a kosher supermarket and people would stare at me, or I'd eat at a kosher restaurant and people would like be looking at me like kind of giving me like a judgmental look.
Yeah.
And that's because I didn't fit the mold of probably being an Ashkenazi Jew who's dressed like, head to toe with was it ever violent? Did anybody ever tell me don't be? No. No. But there was a clear feeling of discomfort with me being around. Now, I analyze this as there we have a lot of layers of colonization on our backs in every aspect of the Jewish diaspora. So even my grandma, who is as dark as a raisin, because she's like super Iraqi, when I told her my dream is to marry a girl from Ethiopia, like an Ethiopian Jew, she would come back to me with like sort of racial undertones of like,
Mm.
how could you? She's from Africa. You can't. That's not a real Jew. And you should marry like an Ashkenazi girl. I'm like, Grandma, you have nothing to do with being Ashkenazi. What are you talking about? Like, you're not white, you have no like white colored skin. She's like, you need to marry a white girl, a girl with white skin. I think that's representative. It's not that my grandma is a racist, like horrible person. It's that in each place where the Jewish diaspora was sent out to, there was a lot of, first of all, racism subjected against us. And so you create these tiny little communities They're trying to protect themselves by
Yeah.
intermarrying or looking out for one another. And we're living in the modern manifestation of us all back mixing together. The Geula, or sorry, the Kibbutz Galuyot has begun, and everybody from the Galut, from the diaspora, is sort of mixing in together. And even if it's not in Israel, it's in other places like South Florida, like New York, like Los Angeles, like Australia. Um, so yeah, there's definitely elements of it. Do I see it as a problem? Yeah, it's obviously a problem. Like I'd prefer, like I didn't grow up with that, you know, like I never I've never felt it. Like to me, when it comes to dating, I've always dated Jews of different colors, and when it comes to friends, I've always had friends of different Jewish colors. So like it's never been a thing for me. So I can't really understand that fear and that reserve that you would have to look at a Jew from any specific color and be like, hey, I don't want to be around that person. Because I have, you know, one of my best friends is a Moroccan Jew. Another one of my best friends is a Jew from Poland. Another one is a Jew from America, and like, you know, another is a Jew from Egypt and Romania. So how could I ever look at somebody's color and be like, I don't want to associate with you because of your color skin or because of your cultural heritage? I will say that I do understand from a religious perspective, from a holistic spiritual perspective, if you subscribe to one sect of Jewish identity, you're either ultra Orthodox or traditional, reform, or conservative, whatever. There are people in that specific community and they happen to look a specific way. And you would gravitate to those people because you want to either raise a family or be around only people of that background. I fight that by saying at the end of the day, we're all Jews. And it doesn't, like, these different characteristics that we have of ultra Orthodox and Reform and traditional conservative, they are not real things. These
Yeah.
are like figments that we've come up with as Jewish people to try to survive in a world dominated by Christianity and by Islam. We need to try to return back to the roots of being part of Am Yisrael and what that means. I don't even have a full answer for that, but I know for a fact that being part of Am Yisrael never concerned skin color. It never concerned cultural heritage. And
Mm.
for people who try to paint, I would say this both from the Jewish side and from the anti-Israel side, who try to paint what ancient Israelites or what ancient Am Yisrael would have looked like by one swab of the, you know, color palette. They would say like, "Hey, people here only looked like Middle Eastern, or people only looked like this or like that." I'm like, we're sitting. This country sits at the crossroads of Africa, Asia, and Europe, and we're literally at the crossroads of all three, and people from all three continents have had access to this piece of land for thousands of years. Nobody here has ever looked or been one way. Not Jesus, not Muhammad, not Moses, not Abraham. Nobody here looked
Yeah.
one way. We've always been diverse, and that's in the Bible, you know, as Tzipporah's wife, or sorry, Moshe's wife Tzipporah was supposedly an Ethiopian, and King David had red hair. Like there's no, it's all diverse. That's what we are. We
Yep.
need to embrace our diversity.
Yes, I
Sorry for
agree.
going on a long
No, no,
tangent.
no. It's good. I agree. Completely agree. I think often those divisions that we've created in terms of religious sects don't actually, they do more harm in dividing us than they do in helping us support each other when it's important. Um, so do you find that in Israel then, like, for example, like the dating culture, is that a bit more open, less judgmental between different cultural backgrounds and stuff?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Everybody here, it's just, it's cholent. Everybody's mixed. Or chamin from the Mizrachi Jew. It doesn't, like here, it doesn't matter. I would
Yeah.
say for real, the skin color. I would say that I'm not going to take away the racism that exists here because it does, and like for sure, you know, I've been getting way more connected to the Ethiopian community in Israel for the last couple of years and hearing their grievances also because they're like the newest group of Jews to make it to Israel.
Yeah.
Like first Ashkenazis were here, or actually it was first Mizrachis, then Ashkenazis, then Mizrachis again, and Ethiopians were sort of the last to join the bunch.
Yeah.
They're the newest group on the block, and so people are have the least, I would say, the least racial comfort around them because they don't know them that much. And so I would say that they get subjugated the most these days in Israel to that sort of slight racism. Sometimes it does manifest in bigger things. And like I always tell people, is that we're not perfect. We aren't perfect. We can be racist here. It does happen on a daily basis. But generally, when I walk around the streets, I see Ashkenazi Jews with black Jews. I see brown Jews with white Jews. It doesn't matter. Everyone's mixing. Everyone's mixing. I even see Arabs and Jews together in relationships on a regular basis.
Yeah. Well, hopefully anyone listening in Australia can, take on a little bit of that attitude here. So you've been in Israel and you've been outside of Israel a lot. And do you find that there's a bit of a disconnect between Israelis and diaspora Jews in terms of understanding, or maybe not understanding, but the attitude towards Israel and things that happen in Israel?
Wow, that's a yes. I've been
It's a big
talking about this
question. Yeah.
a lot with people recently, and a lot with other pro-Israel advocates on how sometimes out of touch I would say specifically the American Jewish diaspora feels from Israel. But yes, I would say there's a huge disconnect, and I almost feel like again, because I've always had this duality of living between both places and being sort of very loyal to both places, that American Jewry, specifically from the Northeast, New England, I'm talking like DC and above, have sort of dictated what the Jewish world looks like.
Yeah.
So, for example, growing up, and I only realized this as an adult, I never saw any Jewish people representing me or my family on TV, movies. There was no such thing as a Mizrachi Jewish actor when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I always tell people the closest thing I would say is Jeff Goldblum, but
Because
he's
he got
not
black
even
hair. Yeah.
yeah, he's not even Mizrachi. He is fully Ashkenazi, but he
Yeah.
definitely gives that vibe of like a Yemenite dad in Israel.
Yeah, sure.
But like yeah, I would say that they've sort of dictated what the world of Jews looks like, and I don't think it was for nefarious reasons. I just think it is how things have played out. I think us as Jews, we've done a really bad job um, fighting for our whole story to be told, and that's how you end up in a position in 2024 where we're all being called white colonizers. And that's how we end up in a position where nobody knows the Mizrahi Jewish story, and everybody just writes us off as Arab Jews when in reality, the same persecution that Ashkenazi Jews got in Europe for not being European, Mizrahi Jews got in Arab lands for not being Arab because they were recognized that, oh, so we actually all had the same story.
Yeah.
And same thing, by the way, with Ethiopian Jews. They gave them the name Falashmura, which literally means the others, or people who are
Right.
not from there. When you or I probably would not be able to tell an Ethiopian Jew from an Ethiopian Christian just by our eyes. Even in their country, they would be able to tell that these guys are not from here. They came from
Wow.
somewhere else. So we all have this similar story where we were othered, but we've chosen to only represent one part of that story in one particular place, and it seems to be that that place dictates all of world Jewry what our story is. I think it's a disservice, and then it also breeds that disconnect because I do think that a lot of Jews in the West have no idea what Israel really is, besides a caricature of their birthright trip if they ever came here, which is basically a shawarma sandwich in Shuka Kalmel and sitting on the beach in Tel Aviv. Like that's not saying that that's not an integral part of Israel because it is,
And riding the
um,
camel.
and riding the camel,
Riding the
but
camel, yeah. That
that
was the best
isn't
part.
Israel. That isn't only Israel, and there's a lot more to Israel. And it's important. I think it's so important that Jews also get the full scope on what we have here, and not just the Jewish people that live here, but the non-Jews that live here too, and understanding who we actually are and who we were. It's one of the biggest things that I'm trying to do with my advocacy, besides reaching out to the Arab Muslim world, which is super. I would say it's my first goal is communicating with them. um, it's really educating like the Jews in the West, specifically in this one strip of land, on like I don't think you guys get who we are. Like I'm not sure if you really totally understand who we are and what our story is, and not in like in an angry or like I don't want to ever talk down to some people. It's just more with like a loving hug, like a big brother. Like, listen, I want you to know who I am, so then you can know who you are because our stories parallel each other. It's not an aspect of like my story is more important than yours. It seems to be like your story is the only story that's been told for the last 100 years. And we need our story to be told now so we can combat the narratives against us. the biggest thing I've been saying is support creators like me. I'm not saying it like particularly just in like a fiscal manner, even though that really helps because most of us creators in Israel that are doing this stuff literally can't survive. It's so expensive to survive here.
Mm.
And we're getting, honest to God, we're getting zero support, like zero support other than our own grassroots funding coming from our followers who support us. Like my followers for the last year have been paying my rent and then my food
Wow.
for the month. Like that's how I'm getting by is because they're giving to my Patreon. But I would say like supporting us, bringing us out. How many speaking and talking gigs have happened since October 7th? And how many of those have been Mizrachi Jews or Ethiopian Jews that have been flown out from Israel to come tell their story? It's minimal.
Mm,
It's
yeah,
it's it's
it's like
it's
Rudy. I'm pretty sure that's it.
yeah, Rudy's great. Rudy's wonderful, but he's also been doing this for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
But I'm saying try to diversify your thought besides Rudy. There's a handful. I would even say it's smaller than a handful.
Mm.
And it's not enough. It's like we need to be going on the offensive, not we shouldn't always be on the defensive. I mean, you have people with my family story who literally negate the entire pro-Palestine narrative in one sweep.
Yeah.
A pro-Palestinian cannot handle me in an argument or in a conversation, literally with just me telling my family story. It destroys the whole narrative. So it's like, strap me in, send me in. I'm ready to go. Like, send me in, and there's tons of us that are ready to go. Like, we're sleeper cells, ready to be sent in to combat the
Educate.
narrative, but
Yeah.
it's just not happening. Like we could have a totally different effect. Imagine if America was flooded with a bunch of Mizrachi Jews and African Jews who were telling their stories in college campuses, in protests, in debates, all over the media news. But instead, we have people like Destiny, who's not even Jewish, representing
Yeah.
Israel on Piers Morgan. And
Mm.
then we have Rabbi Shmuley and Candace Owens having discussions on Piers Morgan, and they're not only
Yeah.
are they not representing our group, but they're not. It's not really getting anywhere.
No. Um, have you tried reaching out to Jewish organizations in other
Yeah,
countries? And no, nothing.
it's been a lot of disappointment, I would say, over the
Mm.
course of the last year.
Why do
Just
you think that is?
I like to blame it not on like malfeasance or like racism. I think it's just incompetence. Like I think it's just generally, I think systematically the Jewish world is like become very bureaucratic. And again, I say because one specific place of the Jewish world is dictating to all of us what our story is and has been for a long time. I would say that it's become this very bureaucratic thing where it's like you reach out to say, "Hi, I'd like to come and talk," or "I'd like to tell my story. I'd like to." It's like, okay, we'll have to put this in the system and ask, and then we'll get a budget and
Mm-hmm.
this, and it just never happens. I have been, I would say, gaslit by Jews for the last year on like, hey, we'll send you here, we'll take you here. It's important that you come. You should come here. And like, I haven't been on one delegation. I haven't been on one. And I see myself not to toot my own horn, but like I have 10 years of experience as a content creator. My ability and my strong suit is to tell stories, to tell my family's story. And I have an unbeatable story.
Yeah.
I would be more than happy if you were bringing other Mizrahi Jews or other African Jews to America, to Europe to speak. I wouldn't feel a need to do it. But not only is it not happening to me, it's not happening with other people. So I'm like, at least use me. Like I have your asset. I don't know how long this is gonna last. Like take me, make
Yeah.
the most of me.
So when did you start making the white colonizer videos? Was that right after October 7th or was that before?
I started probably in, I think I would say like April. Once I came to Israel in January. And yeah, I just hatched this idea of like combating because October 7th happened and all of a sudden I became white. I had never been white my entire life, but October 7th happened and I became a white person.
Yeah.
And then people started calling me a genocider and a colonizer and I was like, really, my entire family is refugees persecuted by Muslims. Like how did we colonize anything? We came here poor. We still are poor. Um, so I was like, how exactly does that fit the narrative? And I was like, all right, enough talk. What I'm really good at is sarcasm. Like, let me just go out in the streets. Let me just show them. Like, I
Yeah.
don't need to talk anymore. Let me just show it.
What kind of response have you had to those videos? Do you think you're changing people's perspectives?
I would say it's a mixed bag. Definitely, I am changing some perspectives because I have had this influx of Arabs and Muslims who have gravitated to my content, and I rock with them and they rock with me, and we're really growing an amazing community online of Arab Muslims who follow and engage with my content, and it's
Mm,
honestly the
that's
most
cool.
gratifying thing in the world because it's literally why I got into this in the first place. The first advocacy video I did post October 7th was like October 10th, and I targeted the whole video towards Muslim Arabs. I just I sat down in front of the camera, I said Assalamu alaikum, and then I started reading all the names of Arabs that were killed on October 7th by Hamas. And so my job has always been, I felt, to bridge that gap because I didn't serve in the army and because I look like an Arab, quote unquote, to them, they have a way to look at me at eye level in a way that they don't with a lot of other Jewish people. And so that's one of the things. And I think that the White Colonizer series, at least for those of them who have a sense of humor, who can understand the joke about it, yeah, it works with them. There's not really a way to gauge 100%, but I know that series has made rounds specifically on TikTok. Like on TikTok, almost every episode gets a couple tens of thousands of views, some of them hundreds of thousands of views. And I know that infiltrates a very negative, toxic place that is TikTok because it's just horrible on there. It's super anti-Semitic and super anti-Israel. So you get this Arab looking guy who comes on screen. He says, I'm looking for white colonizers. If you're anti Israel, you're hooked. You're like, and then that ridiculous jingle plays, and you're already starting to question what's going on. And then you
Mm.
see a black Jew all of a sudden, and you're like, did I mind the wrong part of TikTok?
So, what's one of the craziest responses you've had to one of those videos?
I would say the Ethiopian guy, his name is Yossi. I interviewed him in Machne Yehuda in Jerusalem. And the thing is, because I'm Israeli and I speak fluent Hebrew, I choose to not speak with them in Hebrew because Israelis will they'll gravitate if they know that you speak Hebrew, they're not going to try to speak English. They'll just because they're uncomfortable. So I pry at them with a very American accent. So this guy Yossi, his English was not fantastic. And I was asking him these questions, and he doesn't understand obviously what a white colonizer is. Like 99% of Israelis, even the ones who speak really good English, you ask them, what is like, are you a white colonizer? That's what I do at the end of every single one of these videos. I interview them and then I ask them, are you a white colonizer? And they're all like, what is that? So then I explain to them in Hebrew. I say, "Is kovesh lavan she'egia me'Europa," which means you're like a white
Mm.
person came and conquered the land from Europe. And every time they're like, like a lot of them are so cute, like they're so innocent. They're like, of course not. My family's Yemenite. How would I? So this guy Yossi, I asked him this question, and he just looks at me immediately like, "What's wrong with you? You have problem?" I thought he was going to hit me. Like it looked like his whole body was tensing up. And I was explaining, I was like, "No, no, this is a good thing for Israel." Like, I think he thought I was setting him up.
Okay.
And then he just goes, "I'm a black man. I'm black." That
Yes,
was my
that's
favorite one
fun.
so far.
It's funny.
Yeah.
Um, so you've been in Israel all year, well, since January, you said.
Yeah.
Um, what what is the sentiment like amongst young Israelis at the moment? In your impression of the mix, not just Jewish Israelis, but all Israelis.
I would say in a non-cheesy manner, it's like perseverance and sort of keep on keeping on. Like resilience is a big strong thing here. I mean, we're getting beat down every day by the world around us, by the media, by rocket like literal rocket fire. Um and we just kind of like keep on. Like, like we just keep going. Like there's no stopping us. And I have to say, while the situation with the hostages is horrific and it's one of the hardest things I've ever dealt with as an adult, the feelings about that and the mental psyche that we feel as a nation, like mourning with the families, but also wanting to fight this war, putting that on the side for a moment, looking at what we've accomplished in this last year is literally nothing short of a miracle. Like it feels like the stories that my grandpa told me as a kid and my mom told me as a kid of the massive victories they won in 48 and 50s and the 60s. Um, I mean, we've crippled the Islamic regime of Iran and all their terror proxies. And we're going one by one and hitting them harder and harder and harder.
Mm.
And I feel like I'm seeing this like, prophetic Israel coming back, this Israel that's so powerful that people actually fear and respect. Um, so I think that, yeah, on the ground, the vibe is confusing to say the least, because you're mixed with emotions and you don't know what to feel 99% of the time. You don't know if you can celebrate or be happy or be sad, or you need to be sad or you need to be mourning. We're mourning the death of a soldier almost every day. We're mourning the death of a hostage almost every day, or terrible news or something. Almost
Yeah.
every day there's some tragedy. But throughout it all, like we see, I think a lot of us see a really promising future, a really promising future.
What do you think Jews in the diaspora can be doing more of, either to, combating anti-Semitism, or, bringing the story of the Jews to the wider public? What do you think is the best way to do that outside, if you're outside of Israel?
I would say one, I really, really do recommend for every Jew in the diaspora, especially if they've never been, to come to Israel.
Mm.
Obviously, like during the war, maybe it's a little difficult for a lot of people to get their heads around it. It really isn't as dangerous as it seems, but obviously there's a risk because it is a war. So like I
Yeah.
don't say like don't come here right now if you've never been. I mean, unless you're willing to. But like arm yourself with what Israel actually is. Like understand what this country is. I think one of the best ways of knowing what this is by coming here. Like you got to actually feel this place out for yourself and understand that it's a real place. It's not just on the news. Um, but I think one of the biggest things right now, the whole Jewish world needs to put its ego aside. Maybe stop with the, and I've gotten some pushback on this, but maybe like pause with the amount of galas that we do. Maybe put some of that money towards one, combating the narrative
Mm.
properly, grassroots stuff. It doesn't have to be massive billion-dollar Jewish organizations that are fighting the narrative, because anyways the people who we want to reach are not listening to them. Grassroots, people on the ground, people like me, people like the other advocates that are in my sphere, bring us out to talk, platform our stories, get us on the news, make us the face of the Jewish world, rebrand the Jewish world, rebrand Israel in the West to completely something different than it's been.
Yeah.
Not because not because what we have now is a problem, but because the way that the world has changed, and we I would say us Jews, especially the Jews in the West and the Jews in the diaspora, have been an active part in changing the world, because we tend to hold very liberal values and because we tend to hold very accepting and open-minded values. We are not coping with the changes of the world around us, and it's time that we militantly start doing that. No more Jews on the defensive. Jews need to go on the offensive. Be rude, be mean, be attacky, be aggressive. I always say no more nice Jews. So we shouldn't be the same Jews that are afraid to speak up for ourselves.
So, where do you find the most hope at the moment amongst everything that's going on?
I would say like especially these days with everything that's going on, is just by simply looking at our history. Like when all else fails, I just look back at our track record and I'm like, all right,
We'll
like
be fine.
we're gonna
Yeah.
win. Like
Yeah.
I'm not saying without a lot of trauma, and I'm not saying without a lot of horrible things that will happen to us, because they will and they do. But like if I ever need reassurance of where we're heading, I just kind of look back. I'm
We have to have a little
like
faith.
they don't get it, like the neo Nazis that say all Jews are Jews are not white, and then the Arab Muslim extremists that are like, we hate all Zionists, but not the Jews. And then you tell them that 95% of world Jewry is Zionist, and they're like, so we only like 5% of Jews. I'm like, that
Yeah.
makes you racist. And they're like, no, I'm not a racist. I only hate Zionists.
Yeah.
uh, when you look back at that stuff and you try to rationalize it, you can't, because it's just baseless hatred. They hate us. They hate us for being Jews. And they've always hated us for being Jews. That's what they hate about us. And they hate us because when it comes down to brass tacks, like who we actually are, we're pretty freaking amazing. And I don't say it to toot our own horn, but we really are an incredible group of people. I feel it every single day when I'm here on the streets. I feel it every day when I interact with Jewish people. It's just there really is something special about us. Um, and it's not, again, to bring down the amazing special people all over the world, especially those of them who are allies to us, because each person is individual in their own way. But just when we come together as a group, Jewish people, as Am Yisrael, we there's just something about it. I don't really know how to explain it in words. It's just there is something about it, and it's really remarkable. And that's how I find hope, because I just look back at what we accomplished so far. I look at my own family history and how they persevered here. I was just thinking about like my future children and what that'll mean for them to be here in Israel, and how they're continuing that legacy of like, you know, of fathering this land, of being a steward of this land. And it's just the most amazing thing in the world. It really is.
So I like to end the show in two parts. The first part is asking the question, why do you do what you do?
I think because I would say it's a hard question to answer, but I would say it's like, I don't think there's anybody else doing it in the way I'm doing it. If there was, and I felt that I didn't need to, I wouldn't do it. I really did. I really wouldn't. I wouldn't try to shove myself into a space where I'm not needed. But I feel, and it's the reason why I originally took up this position of advocacy, because I was content traveling the world as a travel vlogger. I actually didn't want to get into this because I knew that it would have the potential to destroy my career, which it did. Um, I I'm doing it because I don't feel like there's enough people doing it, and I feel like there isn't anybody with my take, with my perspective, with my history, with my story doing it, and I feel like it's important.
And finally, I like to end the show with a song suggestion from the person that I'm interviewing. And maybe if you have a song you can think of, you don't have to, we're not going to play it now because I'll play it during the live show. But maybe something like a song that your grandparents knew or something in the Iraqi Jewish dialect. I don't know if there's recorded music
I
in
have a great one.
yeah.
Yeah, it comes to mind. So it's a song that my whole family grew up listening to. I'll give a quick story about it because I know we're
Yeah.
ending, but I think it's important. There's a song called Fogel Nahal, which it means under the palms, and there's a big discrepancy in the Iraqi community where nobody knows who wrote this song. The theory is that the Iraqi Jews are the original writers of this song, and this hymn, or sort of this rhythm, was written by the ancient Babylonian Jews of Iraq. And the song Fogel Nahal has been translated and recreated by Arabs all over the Arab world. It is one of the most popular songs in the Arab world. Almost at every place you go in the Arab world. I played it for a friend of mine in the Emirates, and she knew it. She knew it by heart. Played it for a friend from Lebanon. They knew it by heart. Played it for a friend from Morocco. They knew it by heart. Um, and the band that popularized it is called the Al Kuwaiti Band. They existed in Iraq in the early 1920s and 30s, and were also kicked out violently during the Farhud, during the violent pogroms of Iraqi Jewry. And my grandparents, they grew up with that music in Iraq. And the most amazing part of it is that their grandson, his name is Dudu Tassa, he's one of the most popular musicians in Israel. He basically has taken it upon himself to recreate all of that ancient Iraqi music in the modern day. So
Okay.
Fogel Nahal, you can find the old version of it from the 30s and the 20s, which I think is really beautiful. But there's also a new version of it by Dudu Tassa, who's the reincarnation of these Iraqi Jews
Yeah.
here in Israel.